Welcome back to another episode of The Founder, a show that features entrepreneurs and their early stories of ingenuity, struggle, and perseverance to get their companies off the ground. We do our best to capture the uncensored, uncovered look behind the curtain into what founders really faced when getting started. I'm your host, Kallaway. My guest today defines himself as a creative altruist. In the summer of 2018, he launched Loopie, a mobile app for laundry that connects people who don't have the time or desire to do their own with people who can wash, dry, and fold at home for a little extra cash. Loopie doesn't own any laundromats, washers, or dryers, just like Uber doesn't own any vehicles and Airbnb doesn't own any property. This marketplace concept was super important to our founder. He said from the very beginning, he had a keen interest on creating what he calls a dual benefit venture, a type of business that benefits multiple parties. In this case, the buyer who's getting their laundry done and the seller who's doing the laundry. Today, Loopie has pretty impressive traction in Seattle and is planning to launch in other markets soon. This was a really interesting interview that sheds light on the path of a first-time founder and the climb to product market fit and eventual scale. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Without further ado, the founder of Loopie, John Lee. Let's get it. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dive into kind of the origin story and your background and build back up, can you provide just an anchor point? What is Loopie? What do you guys do? Where are you today in terms of kind of mission, vision, size? Just give us a little anchor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So Loopie is a peer-to-peer laundry service. And it's just as simple as it sounds. We connect people who hate doing laundry or don't have the time, or in this particular moment in American history, people who might be quarantined and don't have access to laundromats. And we connect those people with individuals looking to make additional income from the comfort of home.
Got it. Perfect. I'm excited to dive into it. So walk us through kind of your background, your life, kind of leading up to coming up with the idea for Loopie.
Yeah. I think I'm one of those atypical founders in that I'm not the Stanford business, Harvard business, any kind of business graduate. I'm coming at it more from the creative side. I went to a liberal arts college, but I was also the guy who was, selling his Halloween candy on the street when I was, 10 years old. So I've always had this sort of entrepreneurial inkling in me, but I don't really identify as an entrepreneur as much as, I really, what gets me fired up is the idea of what I consider to be dual benefit ventures.
Okay.
So I love the concept of a company, a startup, a venture that is able to benefit multiple parties simultaneously. So obviously, if you think about a company like Loopie, this is a great example of a dual benefit venture because every single time somebody orders our service here in Seattle, we know unequivocally that we're able to benefit both the lives of our customer and the washer who completes the order.
Right.
So that's really, what gets me going.
Okay.
And my idea of, dual benefit ventures is manifesting in the form of Loopie. I'm not necessarily the guy whose life passion it was to, solve the problem of laundry from an early age. That's not me. It's more about the idea and how we introduce a new business model to solve a very neglected and universal problem in a new way.
In college, did you have any exposure to entrepreneurial ventures? And beyond that, kind of what were you working? Was this your first venture post-college or what were you working on in between?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't consider this my first venture, in that when I was younger, when I still lived on the East Coast, I was selling 100% recycled envelopes door to door. And I called that Recycle for Research, and I donated the proceeds to charitable causes and organizations. And that was when I was, in high school. Then in college, I pursued other variations of, this concept. At one point I wanted to create a charitable video-based social network.
Yeah.
But all of these, with the exception of the Recycle for Research one, a lot of my ideas, I never really um, was able to justify pursuing them past the idea stage. So Loopie is the first company of mine, first idea of mine that I've pursued to the point of you're generating revenue. You have a team, customers who are using your service. And so um, to a lot of investors, they consider me a first time founder because this is the first venture of mine that is developed far enough to actually, get in front of a VC.
Yeah. Why was it that some of those other ideas you either didn't choose to or kind of let it get past the idea stage?
One thing I learned, I think, from some of these failures of mine was it's so important to prioritize just getting an MVP out there for a
Mhm.
customer to order. Like I had this idea for a video based social network. Issue was I couldn't get something in front of people to use, and even more importantly, I couldn't get something in front of people that would justify them paying for it, or any business model that involved generating income. And I think one of the reasons that sort of probably informed my pursuing Loopy is I knew from day one that there's a market for this service
Yeah.
and that the barrier to entry is relatively low because every single human being has to do laundry. And so, if I can create a platform that people can understand is a way to outsource that, I'll be able to get even if it's 1 in 100 people, somebody will say, you know what, I hate laundry enough, I'm going to try this service.
Right. So, that's what I wanna talk about. Let's get into the kinda, like, spark for the idea. So when did it hit you? Were you trying to think of ideas that made sense, like you mentioned, that there were market opportunities for, and there was a mismatch of available platforms or solutions? Or did you kinda get a spark for this business when you were doing laundry one day?
It's actually hard for me to point at any one particular moment. There was never like um an aha moment. I do recall, a few different moments of lucidity
Mhm.
where for example, I remember I was staring at a pile of dirty laundry and I'm thinking to myself, man, what if there was a way to outsource this in the same way that you could outsource food delivery. But off that note, I used to be the person who managed the food delivery apps in two different restaurants.
Okay.
Either bringing food to the customer or accepting the order. So I think just by doing that a few hundred or a few thousand times gets you really comfortable with the idea of these platforms that facilitate transactions between consumers and businesses. And then I think another thing that probably influenced me, maybe even subconsciously, right after I graduated college, I worked for a few months at a Staples, and I was a tech associate. And besides selling printers, which I think helped me improve my sales abilities, part of my responsibility was fixing iPhones. And if you've never done it before, just the simple act of taking apart a phone is sort of mind blowing in a way because I think everybody in 2020 at least views phones as sort of these mystical objects that just sort of can do things, and we don't really know how they work. Most people have never seen the inside of their phone, and if they have, it's somebody else fixing it for them.
Yeah.
Um, and so once you realize that, oh, there's actually, it's just a machine, and that it's hardware. I'm not by any means an expert, but just taking apart phones makes you realize that just like anything else, these are um, tools that we can leverage to help us create new opportunities. And in a lot of ways, to me, uh, we're still in day one of the internet in general. And I think we're in day zero of mobile technology. We feel, in 2020, because we've been alive for the whole time, we feel like, oh, they've been around forever. And you even hear people every now and then saying something like, oh, it's, peer to peer apps are a trend or something like that. But to me, I don't think that's true. I think they're here to stay. And I draw a lot of equivalencies to that mindset to one that was held in the early 20th century. So I think, maybe a few decades after the first automobiles came out, there's this body of thought that a lot of these, minds of the 20th century said the automobile is a fad and it's never going to overtake the horse, right? And I think that we're witnessing, sort of a similar moment now, which is a lot of people, most everybody has access to this new technology. And, is this going to be something that continues to exist, or is this going to change? And in my opinion, it's going to get better, and revolutionize the way people do everything, whether that's transportation, whether that's travel, and in Loopie's instance, whether that's doing laundry.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the way we're trending towards future of work, there's gonna be a peer-to-peer marketplace for, or there should be for almost everything, right? I think fractionalizing income and opportunity, like almost democratizing opportunity for people, the supply side of the marketplace, it's super interesting. So I wanna talk about your process, like building the MVP, because as you mentioned, like, and I agree, that's such a critical step, like being able to put something in front of customers, get feedback. When you think about socialization of the idea, was there a period where you were kinda like poking holes and socializing with friends before you built that first MVP, or did you just kind of lock yourself in a room and start building?
For me, it was really important to confirm to myself that this is something I want to go all in on before I told anyone about it. But I think the only thing I had done prior to telling the first people about it was I bought the domain.
Okay.
I think I bought loopieLaundry.com. And then I made a simple website, not advanced at all, couldn't process orders even, but it just described what it was that we did.
Mhm.
Or at the I made it sound like we were already doing it, but in reality, we hadn't even accepted an order yet. But I made this website saying, this is, Loopie is, the first peer-to-peer laundry service. This is what we do, blah blah. But at least then I could put it on my phone and show it to somebody and say, hey, what do you think about this idea?
Yeah.
So I had that. There's no mobile app. It was just an idea, but I had at the very least something I could show somebody, that wasn't just words. Because, the idea itself is, everybody, probably hundreds of people have thought about like
Right.
an Uber for
Uber for
laundry,
laundry, exactly.
right? But the difference is, are you going to execute on that idea? And the first step in executing it is, well, you got to take action. And the first action I took was bought the domain, set up a simple website, started talking to people about it. Everybody I could talk to. I said, what do you think about this idea?
Yeah, so what did they say when you started talking? Like, how many people did you talk to, and what was kind of the early sentiment?
Oh man, some people were more receptive than others. I mean, especially I think a lot of people. The reality is, people in general. There's more people who are not categorized as the early adopters,
Right,
right? So the average person, if they hear a new idea, their first reaction is going to be to try to push back against it
right.
and say, well, that's ridiculous. You really think people are going to do a stranger's laundry, or you really think people are going to be okay letting a stranger do their laundry? And my reaction was, and continues to be, well, think of it this way. In 2020, millions of Americans are used to the concept of getting into a car with a stranger, staying in a stranger's house. And to me, both of those propositions are far riskier than the idea of letting a stranger do your laundry.
Yeah,
But of course, at the time, I had no customers. So
right.
it was easy to assume, and nothing like this ever existed. So it was easy to assume, well, there's no way that could work. Um, at the same time, other people had very different responses, and I'm fortunate that I, have people in my life who say, you know what, that could probably work. And they might say that could work, but I don't know about the price point, or maybe they. But what I found, I think, more than anything else, and this is what made me know that I might be onto something, is that whenever I told this idea to people, If they were older, if they were, in some of the older generations, then yeah, they might just write it off because their spouse has been doing their laundry for the last 30 years. So they can't see how it applies to them. But anybody who, uses a service like Uber already and gets the concept of peer to peer, they instantly would say, I think that could work. But here's the interesting part to me. People would either say, oh my God, I love this idea. I absolutely hate doing laundry. Like, let me know when this is out. I'd become a customer. Or they would say, you know what? I actually find doing laundry quite meditative, and I'd love to make money doing laundry while I watch Netflix at home. And once I realized that it was divisive, but in a good way, I felt like this is great because most anyone's going to fall on one end or the other. You're either going to be a customer or you're going to want to be a washer.
Yeah, you had that validated demand on both sides, like some people from the supply side too. That's interesting. Talk us through the process from that point, right? You're socializing, you have like the content focused site at that point. How long did it take to go from that to like a workable prototype that you launched where you actually built the marketplace? Or were you kind of facilitating the marketplace manually before you had that software in place?
Well, in the very beginning, our first thought was let's just pretend like we have things up and running and see if there's any demand at all, right? And we can find ways, basically doing extremely unscalable things. So I remember for the first probably 3 months after we launched, I like picked up and delivered almost every single order myself because I wanted to see, I wanted to talk to the customers. I wanted to talk to the washers. I wanted to recruit all the washers myself. I wanted to, personally meet every single customer. And so I did that for, I think, about the first 100 days is just understanding what the business is like, trying to improve the service itself.
Yeah.
Because again, I didn't have any relation to laundry previous to doing this, so I had to sort of learn. Well, what's the standard in the industry? What works? What doesn't? What do the customers request of us? So early on, I would do things like I would post an ad on Craigslist, and I would say, Loopie is a peer-to-peer wash and fold service. You can make money from the comfort of home. And then, if people were interested, they would send us an email and say, oh, I just saw your ad on Craigslist. I'd love to become a certified washer. And I'd say, great. This is how you sign up to be a washer. We'll have, like washer support specialists show up to your house and help, orient you and give you the standards of what our expectations are, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, it'd just be me. And I'd go and talk to them and, see what they thought. And, at the very beginning, it was really just learning from the people who were helping me, build it because there's no playbook on that. And then, fast forward to today, and we're actually doing remote orientation for all of our new certified Loopie washers. We have these video modules that walk them through what are the best practices for folding? What are our expectations? What do you do in these different situations?
Yeah.
And we're using the same software that Uber uses to train their drivers. So we feel like we've come a long way from me showing up at somebody's house, with a Loopie bag and trying to explain how it works.
So in the early days, what did your team look like, right? It was you plus how many people were working on this? And like, how do you get those early washers?
So early on, it was me and two interns.
Okay.
And I was sort of savvy in that I really didn't have any resources to pay people. But I knew that colleges, and specifically my alma mater, Whitman College, has this thing called the summer internship grant. And if you're a student and you land an internship, the college will sort of give you a stipend.
Okay.
So I knew that there's this opportunity, and so I got two people to sign up to be interns when really they're just helping me get the thing launched.
Yeah.
And then going back to how did we get washers? We just got people through Craigslist early on. It was very effective. And to this day, we still have so many people wanting to become washers that we have a wait list here in Seattle.
Yeah. So just for a sense of scale, today, how many washers do you have, and how many like, consistent recurring customers do you have right now?
So in Seattle, we have, I think, just over 4 dozen washers active in the city. We have about 700 customers ordering Loopie. And, to us, again, it's still the very beginning. We're not anywhere close to where we think this could be.
Right.
But we're working on, proving out the concept. And, we went from 7 customers to 700. And now the question is, can we get to 7,000? And then so on and so forth. We're definitely still in the earlier part of that transition. And I think the most important thing is that we've done $250,000 in early sales, despite the fact that Loopie doesn't own a single washer or dryer. That's the one data point that I think is the most relevant right now, because that's the thing that makes me really excited and should make any collaborator excited, which is, in the same way that Uber doesn't own any vehicles, Airbnb doesn't own any property, Loopie is this laundry service that doesn't own a single laundromat or even a washer and dryer for that matter. And I think that's the big differentiator, and hopefully what will help Loopie scale to a national level.
For sure. That's incredible. Walk us through like the unit economics. So what would a customer pay? What does a washer get on average? And like how often are they having their laundry done?
Yeah, so customers, I think, historically have ordered an average of every 10 days on our platform. The average account made with Loopie since we launched has spent now over $300 on our service. We charge a flat rate of $29.99 per bag. So we have these duffel bags. They're like a sort of like a gym bag.
Yeah.
And they have a zipper, and we just say as much as you can fit in there while still being able to close the zipper. It's fair game. But $29.99, including delivery. To us, laundry is sort of an archaic industry in that they always charge per item or per pound. We don't feel like that translates well for a mobile, laundry delivery app, because people want to know how much they have to pay.
Right.
And so we want it to be customer centric. That's why we chose a flat rate pricing model. And it also guarantees that we'll be able to pay the washers the right amount, that we'll have a margin at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So we pay washers $12 a bag. And our best washers last month made over $1,200 just doing laundry from the comfort of home.
Wow.
Which to us, I mean, that's all just as, important as the customer end. We feel like that's an opportunity that could really help a lot of people, especially if you consider stay-at-home parents, students, anybody who can't work that traditional 9 to 5, maybe can't afford to drive 10 hours a day as an Uber driver.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden there's this new opportunity in the gig economy that's never existed before.
Yeah, that's incredible. How does the pickup work? So if I'm a consumer, I put as many clothes as I can in the duffel bag. Where do I take it? Is there a centralized drop off or something?
Yes, so there's no centralized drop off yet. We think maybe that's a future optimization. As the customer, you can just leave it in your Loopie duffel bag on your porch. We've actually plugged into the Postmates API.
Nice.
So we don't have to worry about last mile pickup or delivery either. It's important for us that the washers can make money without leaving their house.
Yeah.
Right, because otherwise it would add a level of complexity that we don't want them to have to deal with. Because a lot of them, they want to be a Loopie washer and not an Uber driver, because they got to take care of their baby or something along those lines. And so if we're saying you got to go pick it up too, that's adding friction to that. And so by plugging into the Postmates API, we can allow sort of this third-party logistics platform to handle all pickup and deliveries. We also have a small ops team here in Seattle that help us as well. But the big difference is Loopie doesn't need to invest in a fleet of laundry delivery vehicles. If we expand to a new market tomorrow, we can just have maybe one director of operations and then rely on Postmates delivery or other third-party logistics providers. So again, the way it works is place an order as easy as it is to place an Uber. You can have your laundry picked up from your house brought to a washer's house. They wash, dry, fold it. It's brought back to you in 24 hours.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I'm sure there's so many optimizations you'll look at as you grow, right? Like if the washer wanted to go pick it up
They could
and
get
you
paid a little
avoid,
bit
yeah,
more.
they get paid a little bit more. Exactly. That's awesome. So I want to talk about customer acquisition. So to go from like 7 customers to 700, was that all just word of mouth, good service, or did you try any marketing tactics to try to get exposure? How did that, what did that path look like?
Well, I think for us, we did what we've done so far on very, very limited marketing, right? And so the next phase is what happens when we scale up a city really, really purposefully and, do a $200,000 marketing campaign. And now all of a sudden there's TV and radio and, all the traditional marketing and maybe a very comprehensive social media campaign. That would be super interesting. But to get to this point, a lot of it's word of mouth. A lot of it has been sort of the low hanging fruit, like a simple Google ad campaign, right? So whenever somebody in Seattle searches laundry delivery service, Loopie pops up. So stuff like that, which we've found is a low cost way of getting people to know about Loopie, try our service. And then as we grow our go to market strategy, we'll be a little bit more comprehensive. We'll have like referral codes in place. One of our advisors is actually a manager of strategy and planning at Uber.
Okay.
And so we have, some insight into what their playbook was when they were earlier on and still scaling to new markets. So we'll try to incorporate some of that as well.
I'm curious, how do you think about growth? Is your prioritization like, let's grow at all costs, let's get, double digit increase in new customers every month? Or are you also, of course, trying to balance like making sure that quality of wash stays high and like some of these other KPIs? Is it a balancing act or are you just growth at all costs right now?
I would say for us, it's been more of a balancing act. Now, I might have, that
That
might
could
not be
change.
that might not be the right approach. I probably have made some mistakes in decision making up to this point, but ultimately, we thought early on it's more important to be able to service the orders that come in than to get a bunch of new customers to try Loopie because we've given out this awesome discount code, or you get your
Yeah.
first 10 bags for free, and people are and now all of a sudden we have 1,000 orders coming in and we only have 10 washers, right? So early on, I mean, we definitely prioritized the service, and we said, let's give anybody that orders Loopie, they need to give us, you know, 11 stars out of 10, right? And just even if it's just 3 orders a day, let's just crush those 3 orders so that those customers stay with us. And so now, we found that, we have a lot of loyal customers. So like, for example, we have people, maybe they signed up in October of 2018 and they have essentially used Loopy now, in place of doing their laundry ever. Um, and it's not that that's 100% of our customers, but because we've invested in making sure that our product is, and their service is consistent, um, we can expect that some of these customers, they're going to order us every single Friday. Every single Friday they order 2 bags. They want it to be delivered every single Saturday evening, without fail. And so that's, um, I think, probably a good approach when you just get started. But if we can hit our funding goals, and now all of a sudden we have another $1 million in the bank to scale this thing, then all of a sudden you're talking about growing quicker and getting to new markets and doing whatever it takes to get these customers. And so I think in terms of Loopy's trajectory, we're on the cusp of transitioning from optimizing the service to, okay, we know how to crush an order, we know how to do this properly. Now it's time to go out and get more customers, get the word out, get more washers, and start scaling to new markets as quickly as possible.
So this next question, I think this will probably change over time, but today, what's your bigger constraint? Is it finding washers or finding customers, or is it fairly equilibrium right now?
Well, I'll answer this question as I would have answered it 3 weeks ago, and then I'll answer the question as I will answer it going forwards in light of the COVID.
Yeah.
Traditionally, up until this point, we've been able to get washers incredibly easily. In that we posted a Facebook job posting a few weeks ago, and I think in 72 hours we had 42 applicants, and we've had people send us emails saying, hey, I saw your ad for being a Loopie washer. I love the idea. I have 2 kids. I want to stay home full time. I'm working, maybe in a restaurant right now. Can I quit my job and just work for Loopie full time? I need to have at least 10 bags a day. And we have to tell these people, unfortunately, please don't quit your day job, because we don't want you to quit your job, become a Loopie washer, and we don't have as many bags as you need. So traditionally, it's been easier for us to fulfill the supply side than to get the customers to try it, because it's so early on, and we need early adopters, and a lot of those people are just people who hate doing laundry.
Yeah.
That being said, it's encouraging because traditionally peer-to-peer companies suffer because they don't have enough on the supply side. They can't convince people to be the ones, shopping at the grocery store. Companies like Uber, Lyft spend hundreds of dollars to convince people to become drivers. But for us, we're not, as of now, facing any of that. It's more about customer acquisition instead of washer acquisition. Now, given the current situation, with the coronavirus, we're actually seeing that. We've decided to stop recruiting washers for the time being, at least here in Seattle, until things settle down. We want to limit exposure, right? But we already have all these washers who are up and operational, and it turns out that there's all of a sudden, almost overnight, tens of thousands of people in Seattle who probably 3 weeks ago wouldn't consider using Loopie, but now there's a shelter in place, order um, in effect, and these are people who maybe they used to be relying on the laundromat, but they're not about to walk to the laundromat now, or maybe they have a shared laundry room even in a bigger
Yeah.
apartment building. So they're saying, as of now, people are still more comfortable and more willing to use a service like Loopie than to go to the laundromat to do laundry during coronavirus.
Yeah. How did you enforce, like, quality standards in terms of, like, making sure the laundry was washed up to a certain level and folded, like, appropriately? Like, I know you probably have more rigorous training now, but early on, did you face struggles with that?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, early on, I remember some of our early orders, we only had maybe 3 or 4 washers. And there were totally days where all 4 of the Loopie washers on our platform said, "Yeah, I'm not gonna take any orders today." And so it's just me in a laundromat or me in my apartment doing
Washing
laundry,
clothes?
washing clothes, and I'm a horrible folder, so obviously I'd be a customer as well. But yeah, I mean, I think in the beginning, it's tough because it's so hard to be consistent, but you really need to be consistent. You basically have to fake it until you make it, and make the customers think that this is a super legit service, even if it's you doing it in a laundromat. You just got to do what you got to do.
I wanna talk about, competition a little bit. I think of this 2 ways, right? One is, like, other services that exist in other markets or even in Seattle, but before we hit that piece, the main competition is, like, if someone doesn't have a laundry machine or washer and dryer in their apartment, they're like a perfect fit, right? It's
Yeah.
so friction heavy for them to go do their laundry, they have to go to the laundromat. How do you convert people who have those machines to a Loopy customer? Other than, like, they're so lazy that they just dread laundry, but what would have to happen for you to get a lot of conversion on that?
I think it's about a mindset shift. And for us, we've always been very cognizant about the psychological battle that we're facing, right? So it's not just about competing with the local laundromats, competing with the other laundry delivery apps that rely on, fulfillment, brick and mortar fulfillment centers. It's about winning the psychological war. And what I mean by that is, for example, when I first heard the idea for Uber in 2010, 2011, I remember saying, literally, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Why would I get into a car with a
Yeah.
stranger and pay money to go like a mile or 2 miles? I thought that was literally ridiculous. And of course, before the shelter in place or the quarantine started because of coronavirus, I was taking an Uber probably 3 times a week at least. And so a lot can change in terms of a society's mentality collectively in a relatively short amount of time. Like that was just 10 years ago. And so our uphill battle with Loopie is we need to make people feel similarly as we grow. Now, of course, we're essentially in the same position Uber was in 2009 when nobody knows about them. It's still a new concept, and so of course they're only going to have early adopters using them. But I think for Loopy to really win the long term battle and achieve our long term vision, it's going to be every person in the country needs to know that they have an alternative to doing the laundry themselves. And if people can feel like they have an alternative, then that's half the battle right there. Because eventually, and we're not saying, yeah, some of our customers order us every week, but it's the same way that people use food delivery service like Uber Eats, right? And there might be some crazy people who order Uber Eats for literally every single meal, every single day, right? And that's probably not
Yeah.
normal, but that's great for Uber Eats. But I think that the majority of people will use Uber Eats when it's convenient for them. And we're hoping that we can present something similar with laundry. And yeah, you might not order us every single time you do laundry, but there's going to be that one time a month, maybe once every other month or once a week, depending on, how many kids you have and what your schedule is like, where you say, today it is not worth it for me to do this laundry. I'm going to let Loopy take care of this and I'm going to go and do what I enjoy doing. And if we think about the value proposition in terms of time, we know that in 2020, consumers are more willing than ever before to spend money on services that save them their time. And if you compare, the amount of time that ordering Uber Eats saves you relative to driving to the restaurant, picking up yourself, that's maybe 10, 15 minutes. And if you think about laundry, it's probably one of the more time consuming tasks that people face that there's still no easy solution for, right? It's a fractured industry. It's segmented. There's a lot of hyper local solutions, but that's the same. There's a lot of parallels there between the laundry industry in 2020 and the cab industry in 2009. It's not that cab companies weren't successful. It's just that yeah, that cab companies exist, but are you really going to order a cab company to get from your house to your friend's house? Probably not.
Yeah, no way.
But and so in the same way in 2020, there's a lot of laundromats and they offer wash and fold service, but are you really going to order are you going to bring yourself to the laundromat just because you hate doing laundry? Probably not. But if Loopy existed and it was frictionless and easy and hopefully, the brand appealed to people and it wasn't just this, out of left field thing and people knew Loopy is Uber for laundry. Then all of a sudden, I think people are going to start shifting their views and then say, you know what? I think laundry is something I'm willing to outsource. And then that's how we build this, snowball effect of momentum.
Something you said there is really, really important, I think, is the brand, right? People have to trust the brand. What are you doing and what have you done from the beginning to think about and try to push that brand quality in people's minds?
So it's as simple as the name itself, right? I was very intentional when we got started where I didn't want the core name of the company to be directly referencing laundry in any capacity.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
So
smart.
that's why it's not washy, right? Or rinsey or something like that, right? There's a lot of laundry companies exist already that have something wash or press, whatever the allusion is to laundry. So, to me, loopy is nice because, there's maybe an indirect reference there, but it's a clean 2-syllable word that is unique. It's definitely different than what people have heard.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that it's a brand that can transcend the niche of a regional laundry service. In the same way that, like, does the name Uber have that much to do with transportation? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, of course, they used to be called Uber Cab, but um, the thought process behind even the name went into, how can we create a brand that can be supported in a much larger sense, and then especially a brand that maybe we will scale into other market verticals down the road. If we nail laundry and we get it right, maybe we can offer it. And just as an example, maybe Loopie pivots and is now a home service provider. So there's Loopie Laundry, and maybe they're selling like Loopie Lawns, and we're doing yard care for people. I mean, that's just an example, but by having it be Loopie, it opens up more possibilities for us. And the other thing, I like to point out is, if we do this thought experiment, right, where if I were to ask people, what's the first company that comes to your mind when I say ride sharing app? I would say 99% of people instantly say either Uber or Lyft, right?
Yeah, right.
Instantly, you're just like, ride sharing app, Uber, Lyft, Uber or Lyft, whichever one you took most recently,
Right.
or whichever one rolls off the top of your tongue. Now, if I were to ask you, what's the first company that comes to your mind when I say laundry? Most people
There isn't.
maybe say something local, but there's not like a clear like national winner.
Yeah.
And so I want Loopie to be that brand, But to get to that point, we obviously need to scale to um, all these cities, all these territories. That takes capital. We're in a very precarious time right now in terms of traditional investment from the VCs, from even angel investors, in light of the downturn in the stock market. So we'll have to see how we respond, and if we need to make adjustments to get people to consider investing in our platform.
Yeah.
But again, the way our approach, and this also goes into branding, is Loopie is a company for the long term, right? This is a long-term company with a long-term vision, looking for long-term investors.
Hmm.
And by having that mentality, and then also, a super, super customer centric ordering process, a very friendly user experience, even, the way our Instagram looks, that all plays a role in our brand.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will be enough to sort of continue to push us forward, even through times of adversity.
Yeah. And I want to shift to funding, but before we go there, one more question on competition. So I know there are, and you've already referenced, there are other players in other markets. Are there any players that are a little farther in the process that have shown you a roadmap? And what do you think they're doing that you can do better as you guys grow and hopefully pass them?
So it's sort of a double-edged sword in that there's other laundry delivery mobile apps, even companies that were really successful in raising capital. Like, for example, there's this one company that was called Washio.
Okay.
Okay. And they raised, like, I think it was something ridiculous. They raised like $30 million,
Yeah.
and they couldn't be successful. What happened is, every single time they wanted to expand to a new market, they needed to invest millions of dollars to get set up. Whether that's, investing in laundromats or laundry fulfillment centers, filling it with machines, staffing it with dozens of people, to actually provide the service. Their problem is, and it's important to note, they didn't go out of business due to lack of demand. They went out of business because they are spending so much money to get established. And so that's a cautionary tale of why it's important to be asset light, why it's important not to be reliant solely on brick and mortar laundromats and laundry fulfillment centers to provide the service. And I would even argue that in 2020, having this peer-to-peer model and having, say, 20 washers spread throughout a geographic region, each with one machine, it's actually a smarter way to do business
Yeah.
than having a single location with 20. That being said, there's also, to the best of my knowledge, there's no peer-to-peer laundry facilitator or laundry platform that's scaled as far as Loopie. And so that's what makes us different. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to view it, there's no national player in that arena.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to blaze our own trail to some extent. But again, this idea doesn't work 10 years ago. This idea probably doesn't even work 5 years ago. Because in order for Loopie to exist, the Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world had to be successful in normalizing the concept of peer to peer. And I think laundry is a great step into sort of the next iteration of that, the peer to peer 2.0 generation.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. So I want to talk about funding because I think there's going to be people listening that are aspiring entrepreneurs that may get to step one, two, three, and then it's time to raise money. And I think these conversations with founders around how you raised, how you thought about raising, you know, things you wish you would have done differently looking back. Take us through kind of the funding path so far with Loopy and some wisdom there and lessons learned.
Yeah. So the reality is, I started it myself, right? So there was no like, it's an idea on a napkin, and then, magical angel investor happens to overhear it and writes a check.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I had to do it, I think, what's considered the harder way, which is work, minimum wage job in the service industry for, a number of years until you have enough money to justify, creating the LLC, and then, launching the business, getting a credit card, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we didn't even get our first angel investor until, I think, 3 months after we had already launched the service. So I think a lot of aspiring founders, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think the thought is, you have an idea, you try to get funding, and then you can launch the product. But for us, and this is again a lesson I learned from some of my earlier failures, was I don't want to wait for investment to launch the product. I'm just going to do whatever it takes to launch the product, even if that means, you know,
Doing it
yeah,
yourself, watching
yeah,
yourself.
doing yourself. Exactly. And then our first, angel investors were, willing to take a risk on an idea that already had been validated to some extent. So every single investor that invested in Loopie, even the first few early on, we had already gotten customers. We had already gotten washers. Yeah, we weren't doing a whole lot of business, but we had done enough to show that it was a viable concept. And I think that made all the difference. Again, my first investors were not people I knew prior to starting Loopie. I didn't have, a friend who, won the lottery and could help me by giving me $500,000 or whatever. So I had to start the business first. I met people by starting the business. I got introduced to people who then were willing to hear my vision for Loopie, and some of them invested, and that's been incredibly helpful, obviously, in getting to where we are today.
Yeah, and what were some of the things that their concerns or they were pushing back on, like, in that process of due diligence? What were some of those early things? I'm sure one of them was first time founder. I hear that a lot. If you're a first
Yeah,
time founder, you
yeah.
struggle to raise money.
Well, I mean, I've had investors who will look at me, or if they hear the idea, they will literally say that they're not going to invest because, on principle, they don't invest in first time founders.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, right. And so, obviously, for those people, you just sort of have to nod your head, smile, and then, get out of there. Um, but there's other people who are more willing to take a risk, and especially if you have a strong team behind you, that helps. What a big turning point for Loopie was when we had sort of our CTO and, one of, my advisors, this guy named Jeff, sign on. And, Jeff is 25-year Microsoft veteran, pitched the original software architecture of MSN to Bill Gates in 1993. And so having a guy like that all of a sudden helps balance out, the in their 20s founder like myself, who, somebody looks at and says, well, I mean, you're great, you got passion, but, in a polite way, they're basically saying you're an inexperienced idiot who probably
Right.
doesn't know, how to make this thing work. And then all of a sudden, if I have a Jeff on board and I can start bringing on more high powered people to help me launch the thing, that's when the idea goes from, okay, this isn't just a guy who, you know, has an idea. This is somebody who is actually capable of convincing others that they should help manifest the idea. And
Yeah.
so again, going back to the, aspirational founders, I would say don't try to pitch investors first. You got to try to pitch other team members first. Because if you can't convince somebody, who has the experience you need and that can help you to sign on to your team, that's a really early indication that, well, why would an investor sign on? If you can't convince a team to coalesce around your idea, then you don't have, the, sort of interpersonal capacities that will allow you to get
Yeah.
an investor, which are, by the way, much harder to land than
Right.
the team members.
Yeah. So talk about that story with Jeff. How did you, obviously he was your advisor, but how did you convince him to come aboard, and kind of what was he thinking at that time?
Well, coincidentally, he worked in the same office as my uncle. So my uncle is another business guy, and also been incredibly helpful in the trajectory of the company. But when I first had the idea, I pitched my uncle, and he said, "It's an interesting idea, but you really ought to talk to this guy I know and who I'm friends with named Jeff, works in my building." And so I went over and I pitched Jeff, and Jeff liked the idea so much after I pitched him that he said that he's willing to sign on as the CTO, and sort of help, with the software architecture of Loopie. We sort of built a development team around Jeff, and he also is willing to be an investor in Loopie as well. And so that was a big, big turning point for us because it was able to help us. It added legitimacy, but B, it also helped us create the apps themselves. Hugely, hugely important. And I think without that, we might have a very different path forward. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you have to have a Jeff. You could totally make any company successful in any number of ways. But for us in particular, I think that was helpful, especially because I'm not a technical founder. I need Jeff's expertise in telling me this is the way you want to structure your software. And once he made that roadmap, then we can take that and we have a good idea of how to be successful.
Yeah, talk about your team. So today, where are you at in terms of not necessarily how many people, but what functional expertise do you have alongside you and Jeff? And when you hired those people, what were you looking for? Like, what critical characteristics were you looking for? Because I think that's one of the most important things.
Yeah. Early on, it was just about who can I convince to help us get this thing off the ground. Because the reality was, and this is almost to an extent still true today, almost everybody who signed on to Loopy early on signed on for far less than their market value, right? Developers who could be getting paid 4 times as much signed on to Loopy because they said, this is an idea that I want to be a part of. This is something I want to do that, might pay off long term. And also it's not, working at Amazon.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was fortunate in that I could get people, we have a 4-person development team, plus, a few part-time, front end developers as well. But what's amazing is, again, it's about getting people to buy into the idea and getting people to buy into the long-term vision, and doing whatever you need to do to inspire them enough to say, I, as a developer, right? Because developers. I mean, I'm assuming you're not a developer either,
No, I'm not technical.
right? So, for people like me and you, uh, we just have different opportunities than somebody who is great at, you know, software development. Because right now,
Yeah.
if you're a software developer, you could probably work for a Facebook or an Amazon or a Microsoft and have a very, I would say comfortable existence.
Yeah.
And so if you're a startup founder, aspirational startup founder, listening to a podcast like this, and you don't know how to code, so you're not the Jeff, you're not the technical co-founder, then your number one priority, if your startup requires development, will be you either need to recruit a team to help you develop your idea. So these are team members that you have in person,
Yeah.
or you need to save or raise enough capital to produce whatever software you need, outsource that development to a firm.
Yeah.
And that's the big decision you need to make. And now I literally was trying to decide what path to go down for the first probably 6 months of Loopie, because I didn't have a team, I didn't have a development team, and I didn't have any capital. So I'm just sort of figuring out what how do I make this work? And then eventually you get introduced to a Jeff, and he brings on a guy, and he brings on a guy, and and that's how things snowball.
It's really interesting you talk about, like, hiring a team versus a firm. I was actually I was involved kinda co-founding a company a few years ago, and it was two of us did it, and neither were technical, which is a recipe for tough road to head, right?
Yeah.
You can do it, but you need some technical expertise, and we face the same thing, whether you bring on a third person technical co-founder, which I think is the right move because you've got somebody invested and kind of both culture focused, product focused, et cetera. Or what we tried is hire a agency to build it, and they kind of build it and leave it, and then you're stuck. So that's yeah, I'm totally agree with what you're saying. I want to talk. So before I kind of do like a rapid fire round with some interesting things, I want to talk about scale. So you mentioned it a little bit. I think it was a great thing you said. You want Loopie to be that when you think of kind of laundry brand or laundry service peer to peer, you think Loopie. Paint the picture for you know, I think market expansion you mentioned is a key thing. How are you guys thinking about that? What's your timeline? What are the constraints? Where do you think you'll go first? Like, just talk about scale and how you're thinking about it.
Well, again, every plan you have as a startup goes out the window when
Yeah, with coronavirus.
with coronavirus. So let's say long term, assuming that I'm still alive, Loopie's still alive, a year from now, and hopefully things are settled down, and now we can continue to go towards our strategic milestones. The idea is, let's deploy to each new city as efficiently as possible, but as effectively as possible. And so what we've done is we've actually built out this playbook, a go-to-market strategy that says, what does it cost to get to a new market? How many people do we need to employ? What's our, what's the timeline, right? So like if we want to go to, say, Chicago tomorrow, we need to recruit a certain number of washers, right? And we can recruit them remotely. And then we need to get maybe a single person to manage the operations there, which again, better than having a dozen delivery drivers. And then we need to start deploying remote ads to target customers. Probably have a payback period for all that. That will all probably cost some amount of money. But then eventually, hopefully, we could get it to the point of where Loopie is in Seattle, and go eventually from starting out. It might be okay. We're just making $2,500 a month. Now we're making $5,000 a month. Now we're making $10,000 a month. Then slowly building each of these cities up, just like we've done here in Seattle. So eventually they're doing $25,000 a month. And I think Loopie is successful not if we go to one city and we're doing $1 million a month in sales. I mean, that would be amazing, and I think that's possible. But I think we can do it quicker by dividing and conquering.
Mhm.
So getting, say, for example, if we got 50 different markets to each just be doing 10 bags a day,
Yeah.
super attainable. That's not, in my opinion, impossible.
Yeah.
50 markets doing 10 bags a day, that's 500 bags a day, right? And at $30 a bag, that ends up being $5.5 million a year in revenue. And so then all of a sudden you're telling yourself, do you think that there's enough people in the world that you could get washers in 50 markets and you could get 10 customers in 50 markets? My answer is, well, of course. I don't care if it's a suburb. I don't care if it's a small town. There's probably somebody who's a stay-at-home parent, be a washer. Probably some people who hate laundry. And so if we replicate that, and again, that's just, again, tip of the iceberg. 500 bags a day equals $1 million a year net revenue for us. But we know that there's probably more than 500 people in the US who hate laundry.
Yeah.
So then the question is, how big can you get it and how quickly and how much money can you bring in? And, then you get into the nitty gritty and, hopefully at that point, we might be able to talk to a company like Uber or Lyft or whoever it is who's maybe just had an IPO. They're looking for ways to add to their, revenue. And they look at us and they're like, oh, cool, this is a new market vertical. We might want to partner and or acquire a company like Loopie. And that's, talking about long-term strategy. That's certainly one outcome. But another is, well, what if we just keep growing and growing and growing? We go from 50 markets doing 10 bags a day. What if we're doing 100 markets and they're doing 100 bags a day?
Right.
So on and so forth. That's how you scale exponentially.
When you think about like what's city number 2, number 3, number 4, have you given that thought?
We're thinking right now there's a few different ideal markets for us to expand to. We actually have 10 that if we were able to raise the amount of capital we want, we could sort of expand to simultaneously. If that's now been impacted by coronavirus, we're gonna have to get scrappy again. Like I'm not above just driving to these cities myself and launching them just like how I launched in Seattle. And yeah, it's going to take longer and yeah, it's going to be, more difficult, but it's one of those things where there's no
right way to do it.
Yeah, you just got to do it. Like just as much as the person listening to this who has this idea for a company needs to go and execute before they're considered legitimate. The scary part is you could execute for literally a year and a half, 18 months, 700 plus days you could execute every single day. Yeah. And you might still not be where you need to be. And so you might need to, if you're in my position, okay, well, great. You've done over $200,000 in revenue. You've raised $500,000, but you're still not, successful. You're still not where you need to be to, get it over the finish line. So, you still are just perpetually faced with, having to work and, give it your all. And I think that's what prevents people from pursuing ideas, because then all of a sudden, you might work really hard for 100 days, make a lot of sacrifices. And now all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, I don't know if this is worth it anymore.
Yeah, I don't want to do it anymore.
Right, yeah, you might be able to go 100 days, you might be able to go 200 days, you might even be able to go 500 days. But eventually, if you haven't made as much progress as you want, you're gonna get broken down by it. And so the hardest part is just keep going, just stare the adversity in the face and refuse to give in to the temptation of, pulling the plug on that thing, unless it's important and necessary to pivot, in which case, then absolutely do it. Don't pursue a bad idea if the market is telling you it's not going to work.
I'm curious what you think, how the coronavirus is going to affect the startup landscape. So you mentioned for you guys, it's obviously it's tough because you're trying to raise, but there are some good things which you mentioned, right? There are new customers that need your service. There are other startups that aren't benefiting in the slightest. What do you think is going to happen when the dust settles and we come out of this? Do you think 40, 50, 60% of these companies are just going to be dead?
Yeah, probably. A lot of founders are so attached to their original idea. It's going to be too overwhelming they won't be able to pivot fast enough, is what I think I'm getting at, is they only have so much runway in terms of burn. their investor leads are drying up. It's really hard to convince an investor to invest if the market is tanking and now your startup is not even allowed to operate.
Yeah.
If they even were in operation. And now if they're in the before product stage, well, now even if they got an investment, they couldn't even launch because of coronavirus.
Right.
So there's probably like a 6-month window now of just sort of stagnation. And so again, I think it's going to be about what are you willing to do to keep the company alive? What do you need to do in terms of pivoting? Uh, making adjustments to your model, potentially just flat out hustling kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because and what sucks is if you're someone like me and now all of a sudden you have 10, 15 people who you've been paying,
Yeah.
right? That's what like I envy anybody who's still just a solo founder, or just you and your partner, because you don't have to worry about,
Yeah.
paying
Cash
other
burn.
people's rent. Yeah. That's honestly the hardest part. I think a lot of startup founders are going to face is, well, how do you justify the burn if you're not if you're not doing any revenue, or if you were relying on investor capital, how are you going to balance that out? And the real question is, how long is the situation going to go on for? Is this
Yeah.
a 1 or 2 month affair, or is this a 3 or 4 month affair, like a lot of people are saying? Right? Some people might even. I think I heard the other day, some people say this is a 5 or 6 month thing. Like things aren't even going to come close to normal until
Until the
August.
fall.
Yeah, August, September at the earliest. And so now all of a sudden, you take the average amount of cash in a startup's bank, you take the burn, and just statistically, unless companies are
Just
so
raised.
good, just raised, or are so good at innovating, or they're so lean that they can overcome that, they're gonna die. I mean,
Yeah.
Loopie included, right? If we need to raise capital, we need to increase revenue, um, or we're gonna have some really intense, not ideal situations come up in the near future.
Yeah.
But I think the reason why startups, and especially startup founders, I think are good, hopefully in these kinds of situations, is if you started a startup in the first place, you already knew the odds, right? You like if you were the conservative person, who's trying to basically choose the better way of, I guess, choosing the lesser of two evils, you just wouldn't start the startup in the first place. So I think startup founders have that going for them, in that they're already a little bit overly optimistic. Um, they're probably a little bit scrappy, and so if they can lean into that, I mean, I'm doing that right now. Like, we're saying, what's our contingency plan? How can we leverage this situation to our benefit? What can we do to generate more income and revenue for ourselves?
Yeah. It's so interesting you say, like, you could execute for 500 days and really not misstep, and then if your business is just not optimized for these types of conditions, you're
Yeah, you're
dead. Like,
screwed.
you're
Yeah.
screwed. That's interesting. Alright, let's shift into a rapid fire round. I've got probably 6 or 7 questions, that I'm interested in your take in. So, we talked about team and hiring. A question I like to ask is, and this answer for you might be easier based on what you've said, but who is your most, like, underrated hire? Like, at a time when there was a functional need, skill-based or just timing-based, someone that came in and just blew you away in terms of, like, their skill or their ability and has really turned the corner for you guys?
Underrated hire. Actually, probably my very first hire outside of those two interns I talked about. This guy named Chet. He's not my chief of staff, but he literally was responsible for this chain reaction event where he brought on his roommate who happened to be a developer. Then that guy brought on two more developers who, one he is who he met, I guess online, and then the other one he went to school with.
Okay.
So again, like, thanks to Chet, we got, this dev team, and Chet wasn't hired to do that, but just sort of, again, butterfly effect, if you will. serendipity, and the fact that Chet was able to pitch them well enough to be willing to talk to me, then I was able to talk to them about saying, hey, you should consider helping us.
That's awesome. A lot of founders, when I talk to them, they kind of build out an advisory board early on. Did you do that? And what kind of people were on that advisory board, and how have they helped you?
I actually didn't really have an advisory board early on. I mean, I sought counsel from like my girlfriend and my parents. I didn't have like advisors until more recently, and actually, my uncle, who I mentioned earlier, is one of them. Some of our investors are also advisors. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think advisors are really important, but in a weird way, I think the things that helped me the most, early on before I had advisors, because who's going to advise a guy who has no company, right?
Right.
You got to have some amount of traction for them to consider being an advisor. Was when I was still working in the restaurants, I read all these books on business, and these books, I think, to me, were sort of fundamental in helping me think through problems, and I consulted some of these books as if they were advisors.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for anybody in any startup, there's probably a book out there for the startup you're trying to make, helping you do that. And so just reading these books, I mean, what I would say is if you're a founder and your project isn't really time sensitive or you haven't started it yet, reading books is like investing in private counseling sessions with advisors. And you can just do it for hours and hours and hours. And eventually, if you've read, a few dozen or however many books you need to read to feel comfortable, then you can embark on your entrepreneurial journey with essentially this life knowledge of these really successful people that you wouldn't, for example, a lot of the books I read, they're by people who, if you just call them up, they're not going to be your advisor. But if you
Right.
read their book, you probably learn more information than if they're
Yeah. Their
list.
best thoughts are in there.
Yeah, then if it's not, to me, it's not about listing them as an advisor on your pitch deck. It's about knowing what their thoughts are, and you do that by reading their books.
Do any of those books come to mind that you'd recommend, um, or books or resources or blogs or anything you follow?
Yeah, there's a lot. But I would say, I'm trying to think of ones that are specific to just anyone that were influential to me. Um, Podcast wise, Masters of Scale, How I Built This are obvious ones. Book wise, it's a controversial book, but I think The Lean Startup is helpful to
Okay.
founders who have never done anything before. Another one I like a lot is it's a small book by Austin Kleon. Actually, he's an artist, but it's called Show Your Work. And so
Okay.
that book is really helpful in um, making you consider, sharing what you're doing, and being open about what you're doing, and um, documenting what you're doing. And
Yeah.
obviously, that's true if you're an artist, but it's also true if you're an entrepreneur, because what you don't want is to have a great idea and then feel like you need to protect it for so long that it's only in your head and it's not out there. I think once you put the idea out there, you're able to make it better. So Show Your
Yeah.
Work is good. Catching the Big Fish by David Lynch. It's another, it's not, I don't think, meant for business, but really interesting. I read taking, I think it's called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, former U.S. Navy
Okay.
SEAL.
Yeah.
Just
He's a crazy guy.
yeah, stuff like that. Helpful. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Um,
Okay.
just trying to get in good habits, trying to, I mean, and I'm not saying I'm good at that. I actually suck at a lot of that stuff. But again, this is why it's important to read these books, is so that you can try to become a better person.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great list. I want to talk a little bit about struggles. So thinking back, I mean, you learned so much so quickly, but what's one thing you wish that you know now that you wish you knew then when you were starting out, or that you go back and tell yourself 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Some of my biggest regrets, I would say, is not doubling down in the grittiness part. Like, I regret not going out and just handing out flyers for Loopie on the streets every single day since we launched. Like, I deeply regret that because I know that I can, pitch Loopie really well and I'm a good salesperson. So, in thinking back, I'm like, what did, obviously I was working, the entire period of time, but it's like something as simple as making it a habit, going back to the Power of Habit book, making a habit of going to a street corner in Seattle, going maybe in front of a laundromat and trying to get one customer a day,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I had done that consistently for the last 700 days, I'd have twice as many customers. And I'm almost positive that if I had done that, I would have twice as many customers right now. Now, again, in the moment, you're thinking, oh, well, it's more important that, I hire this person, or it's more important that I'm dealing with this customer service
Yeah, or
call, or
build the product.
yeah, all these things. But then ultimately, it's just losing sight of like, I should have been, and I'm, if we're ever not in this coronavirus situation, I'm gonna hit the streets with flyers, and because you're never above that. I'm gonna force my entire team to do that as often as possible, just because we're still in that stage, and to think that we're not would be foolish. So I think about that a lot at night.
Something I like to talk about on this is founder mentality. So I think you start to see patterns emerge when you talk to, founders, and I think you exude a lot of the qualities that a lot of the other founders I've talked to so far on the show. But from your perspective, what do you think it takes mentality wise and kind of personality wise to be a good founder?
Well, I think it's really important to have good um, interpersonal skills. You have to be able to communicate with people, um, whether that's good in good times or bad times. I think that for me, I'm not good at a lot of things. I can't develop code, right? But I think what's helped me get this far is that I've been able to inspire people to believe in the vision. And as a founder, you really have to, if you have to do anything, it's you have to be a good storyteller. You have to
Mhm.
be able to tell your story good enough that someone else might be willing to say, you know what, I want to help you achieve that goal. Um, and so when I think about my I don't know what you call them, strengths as a founder, it's probably in that kind of interpersonal communication. Um, whether that's talking to a customer, calling our service line, whether that's talking to a washer, whether that's talking to an investor or a potential team member, a team member, you have to be interested, able, and willing to have conversations, and hopefully having good interactions with people.
I totally agree with that. In that same vein, I want to talk about like skill set evolution. How has your skill set evolved and what skills do you think you've grown significantly over the past 2, 3 years while building this business?
Um, so what skills of mine basically became better over time?
Yeah, exactly. So you said like your interpersonal skills were probably pretty strong at the beginning and that's why you were able to convince people. So those have probably strengthened, but were already pretty great. What do you think you weren't great at starting out that you are now having been in this role?
Well, I definitely think that some parts of that communication got better. Like, when I first started, I didn't really understand what you needed to do to pitch an investor successfully, right? I was good at talking to investors, but I didn't know, like, what do you need to say to an investor to actually make them want to invest in your company? So stuff like that, you learn a lot from going to $0 raised to, over, 500, 600, 700,000 raised. So that's an area that I've improved a little bit. I think I've gotten better at being decisive. I've gotten much, much better at saying no. Um,
Yeah.
Early on, you're just so optimistic and you just basically want to say yes to every opportunity. Um, and and now I find myself way more guarded when it comes to what ideas do you accept? What things do you need to say no to? What takes priority? But in a weird way, um, you learn a lot, starting a business. But there's also areas where you probably become worse. It's sad to say, but you've definitely become worse in certain areas. And so it's important to be self-aware. I think I would say my self-awareness has gone up because now I'm constantly thinking about, well, am I reacting to this because I'm stressed out and I've been working on this for 700 something days, and you're not the same person you were when you launched it, when you were fresh and you were like, all right, let's do this thing. And now all of a sudden it's day 700 something and you've been grinding for so long. And now you need to, try to, you know, it's hard to remain good at decision making under pressure at times. So, being able to balance that is important.
Totally. Let's talk about real quick morning routines. So it's a kind of a big topic. A lot of successful people have these like rituals they do every single day. Do you have a morning routine and what's that look like?
Yeah, well, again, routine is a little bit different now than back when I was commuting to the office. But I'm unfortunately one of those people who tries to wake up really, really early to maximize productivity. Like I was literally on the wake up at 4:35 a.m. Life for quite some time. But now, there's less need for me to be that drastic because I'm not trying to beat people to the office as I once did.
Yeah.
Um, but I like reading in the morning, um, and I like listening to music. That's sort of, I usually will skip meals um, just because I don't have time. I'll usually not even drink coffee. I have been doing caffeine pills instead, which probably isn't, advised in all instances, but it happened for me in just that, when you're working, you just at some point as a founder, you're going to be so overwhelmed that you literally will say, I would rather just, at least for me, take this caffeine pill than A, have to go somewhere, buy a coffee, B, spend the time to make the coffee, And so, in the mornings, it's about reading the news, seeing how things are going. It's about trying to spend some time reading a book, so that you're still getting. I was talking earlier on about books as being sort of your advisors. It's like you're never above learning, and there's so much you can learn from books. I try to read in the morning, every morning. It's unfortunate when I'm too busy to do that. And then also listening to music. I mean, to me, music is a very cathartic thing. Do that all the time. And then again, before the coronavirus situation, one thing that I do in the mornings that probably is more unique is I would take pictures on my way to work.
Okay.
So I've been it's sort of one of my outlets, right? I take portraits of people and strangers I meet on the streets of Seattle. And so I've done this for basically 2.5, 3 years now, and I've taken thousands of people's portraits. And it's a cool excuse to connect with somebody outside of the context of your work and learn their story.
That's awesome.
And so as somebody who's, passionate about photography, I, again, before coronavirus situation, I try to factor that in to my mornings, even if that's taking, a picture of whatever happens, whatever the universe puts in front of you.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, final 2 questions. These are kind of the traditions we have on the show we ask to every single guest. So the first one is the startup manifesto. So if you had to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
Mm. Um, 5 lessons to avoid when starting a startup,
Or pitfalls to avoid?
or pitfalls to avoid. First one is not thinking through your business model in a sufficient way. So you need to know not just what the idea is, but how are you going to generate money from that? Even if it's simple, you don't need to know the price point, but you need to know how is the customer paying for whatever product or service you're doing. The other pitfall I would say is um, underestimating your customer acquisition cost. You're probably going to say, okay, I have this great idea, and how am I going to make money? Oh, I'm going to get customers to pay for it. But how are you going to get those customers? And how much are you going to spend on those customers? That's something that don't underestimate the customer acquisition cost. If anything, assume that it's going to cost more money to get customers so that you don't, damage your business model, unit economics. Um, a pitfall would be listening to the bad feedback from other people. So there's going to be some good feedback. There's going to be some bad feedback. Early on, it's so easy to be influenced. You could easily accidentally screw yourself because you just listened to somebody's feedback that actually hurt your chances of succeeding, and so the idea would be just try to get your idea out there and make adjustments based on how it performs and not how somebody tells you like I remember before I even had the product, I went to this guy, this investor. So this is my idea for Loopie. He takes out his phone and he searches for laundry. And obviously Loopie doesn't come up because it doesn't even exist yet. And he says, look, there's already all these laundry apps out there. Right. And so if I had had that impact or influence me, then I would have been like, oh man,
Yeah, you would have never got
yeah,
started.
I would have been like, okay, well maybe I should do something else. And so the important thing is there's going to be naysayers. Don't listen to naysayers, even if they're they don't have to be potential investors. They could be friends and family. It's okay for them to think your idea is ridiculous because the best ideas are divisive and they're radical and they're out of left field and people won't understand. So don't, that's my, 3, 4, and 5 pitfall to avoid.
Got it. Perfect. Cool. So last question, I referenced it earlier, is the nomination. So it's your turn to nominate another founder that is either a friend, a colleague, or a mentor of yours that you'd like to see on the show. You have anybody in mind?
I'm thinking about it. I know of this other founder and CEO who is super successful at what she does. She is, I think she was at one point mentioned in like the Forbes 30 under 30
Okay.
class, but her name is Lisa Curtis. She also went to my college. I think she's a few years older than me. And she's the founder and CEO of a superfood brand. It's like I think it's called Moringa,
Okay.
but it's called Cooley Cooley. And she's been really successful in getting that thing to like I think she's got that into like 5,000 plus supermarkets in the U.S. Like did a Series A, far ahead of Loopie and my trajectory, but definitely somebody that might be worthwhile having on your show.
Cool. I'll reach out to her for sure. I want to take a second before we wrap to just acknowledge you. I think after hearing your story, the kind of the thing that inspires me most is like your outlook. I think you've kept a super positive and like even keel outlook through I think some like critical moments as you've described them, where you kind of didn't know what the path forward was going to be, and something ended up happening, and even now in the Corona time. So I just want to acknowledge you for that, and I'm excited to keep up with the journey and see how things progress.
Yeah, appreciate you. Thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share Loopy with as many people as I can.
For sure. And one last chance for you to kind of plug Loopy. So where, if people are interested or they're in the Seattle area and they want to, become a customer, where can they look to find Loopy, your social, Loopy social?
Yeah, I'll even go one step farther than that. So obviously follow Loopie just at Loopie Laundry, or visit our website, which is just www.loopie.io. Download the Loopie app if you're in Seattle, place an order. If you're a aspiring entrepreneur, okay, and you might not live in Seattle, you might live in a Portland or in Austin, but you want a super hands-on way to learn about business, send me an email or reach out to Loopie in whatever way that you can, and consider helping me launch Loopie in whatever city you're in, right? Because I'm where, again, coronavirus situation is putting some things on delay, but this is allowing me to do things like be on the podcast from home when, right now I would be in the office, right? And so I'm trying to take advantage of that. And I'm thinking if people are listening to this, they might say, I'm super interested in business and entrepreneurship, but I don't feel confident or ready to be my own founder yet, be a CEO of a company. You can basically learn everything there is about launching a business through helping me launch Loopie in whatever town or city you find yourself in, if you're willing to help me. I'm looking for sort of passionate folks who want to be a part of something, who want to understand how business works, and if they've heard this story, might if Loopie's vision resonates with them, I invite them to contact me and help me get this thing off the ground in their town or city, because that would be super exciting and maybe a good way for them to experience managing and launching a product in their town or city.
It's incredible. That's a great offer. I'm excited to see if someone takes you up on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. John Lee, founder of Loopie. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for listening to that episode with John Lee of Loopie. Remember, if you liked what you heard and want to support the show, there's 3 quick things you could do that would really help us out. 1, subscribe or follow our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. 2, leave a rating, preferably 5 stars. And 3, leave a detailed review on why the show inspired you. It might not seem like it, but that rating and review really goes a long way in helping those podcast platforms like Apple and Spotify push our show to new listeners who might like it. I hope you enjoyed that episode and are looking forward to the next one. Until then, I'm Kallaway, and this is The Founder.